don't we bring in Jessica Levinson and also Zev Yaroslavsky to talk about this? Zev, specifically to you, I think a lot of people thought that we would see the president would, I'm sorry, Jessica Levinson. I thought that they would announce, Zev, that the president would announce some sort of re-election here, Ron, or that he might maybe have a little hint to it. Did you see something that I didn't see? It didn't appear that he did that tonight, right, Zev?
Not explicitly, but I think what we did hear is a lot of let's finish the job. So he mentioned a number of different accomplishments, particularly when it came to the economy, and he talked about healthcare, climate change, criminal justice issues. And in all of those cases, I heard let's finish the job. And jobs, frankly, that take, in some cases, more than 2 years. So that is, I think, an implicit way of saying we need to continue this. Now, he didn't say, and I'm going to be the person, and I'm announcing my bid for re-election in 2024. But either it's him or he wants his successor to really continue on the path that he's laid out.
And Zev, if we can bring you in for a minute as well, this is Zev Yaroslavsky. This was a big platform for the president tonight. Do you think he was able to convince voters tonight 4 more years? You know, the big point of contention, of course, for many voters is the president's age. Zev, are you with us?
Well, I think the election is a little less than. Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we got
you. Go ahead.
Yeah, okay. I think the election is a little less than 2 years away, so we've got a little time on that. I thought his tone, he set out to be bipartisan as much as he can be bipartisan in this environment. He cited all of the bills and the legislation that was signed into law that was done as a result of Republicans and Democrats working together. The people in this country want the polarization to be in the rearview mirror. Right. They want people to work together. They want to make government work. And I think that was his message. And it was really hard for some of the Republicans, you know, to even applaud apple pie and motherhood on this, but I thought he got his message across, and I agree with Jessica. I mean, when he said let's finish the job, I think he was telegraphing. He didn't say it, but I think he's telegraphing, and I'm gonna be here to finish the job with you. But he's asking for collaboration and cooperation, and I think that resonates well with the American people.
So, Zev, let's talk about the polls related to the State of the Union. We know that a number of polls recently are not very good for the president. Just yesterday, there was a poll that only 22% of Americans say that he should run. So, related to this, would any of those people change their mind, you think?
Yeah, I think there's a long way to go before the election. And I'm reminded that Ronald Reagan at this point in time in his first term was less popular than Joe Biden is right now. And George Bush was at 81% or more favorable in 1991, about the same time as we are now in advance of the election. So there's a lot of, you know, this is a poll is a snapshot in time. There's going to be a lot of news and a lot of water to go under the bridge, and the election will end up being Joe Biden if he runs against whoever the Republicans put up, and it'll be crystallized in that way, two people running against each other, and that's how and when the people will make their final decision. I don't think the polls today mean a whole lot. Ask Ronald Reagan, who was at less than 40% popularity in 1983 at this point in time.
Jessica, you know, with inflation easing a bit, there are still fears of recession, of course, going into the speech tonight. Do you think the president actually instilled more confidence in the American people as it relates to the economy after his speech tonight?
Well, the economy obviously was front and center for very obvious reasons. We are dealing with inflation, and we know that people vote based on things that affect their daily lives and how much they pay for basics, how much they pay for food and for gas, and how much it just costs for them to exist on a weekly basis. That's what they vote on. So I think the president had to put that front and center. We also know, as an economic matter, that confidence actually does affect the economy, that consumer confidence and where people think the economy is going, it's not the only factor, but it's something that can actually have concrete and specific effects. So to your question of, you know, was this enough? I frankly don't know that any speech is enough. I think what's enough is when people go to the gas pump or go to the grocery store or they're paying for their health insurance premiums. If those numbers look good, then that will be good for whoever's in power. a huge focus on the economy. But look, this is a president who is not an amazing orator. He laid out a number of big accomplishments when it comes to the economy. But I'm not sure that this really swayed a lot of people more than, again, how much it just cost them to pay for the basics.
You know, it's interesting, Zev, when you talked about a moment in time, and you mentioned Reagan's approval rating being lower, I think what we're talking about here is slightly a little bit different when you talk about only 22% say that he should run for re-election. We're talking about specifically for re-election and his age and all of those polls the way that they are now. And this is State of the Union address isn't probably going to affect, like you mentioned, his re-election in 2 years. So my question to you is, what does he do between now and when he does announce to improve on those polls, to improve on those numbers, even within his own party?
Well, there's an old saying, nothing succeeds like success. And he's got to, he's going to be held accountable and responsible for how things go in the next 21 months. And, inflation, cost of living, cost of goods, all of the things that he enumerated that is a work in progress right now need to go on it needs to continue in the direction it's going, in the way it's trending. And if things are quantifiably better, it won't matter whether he's a Winston Churchillian orator or not. It'll be, what's my gas bill looking like? Not just my gasoline bill, but my natural gas bill. I thought he hit those points really well and connected with the average American. I know how I feel when I'm charged extra to put luggage in the luggage compartment of an airplane, or when I have to upgrade my seat so I can sit with my son on an airplane. Those kinds of things. The thing about Joe Biden is his authenticity. He's not going to win based on oratory. He's going to win based on his character, his authenticity. And I think that's one of his strengths that people underestimate about him.
Jessica, any surprises for you tonight? And if not, what did stick out to you?
So I don't know that there were huge surprises. I agree with everything that Zev just said. I thought really good points. I know that some people were disappointed that there wasn't a larger discussion concerning reproductive choice. There wasn't a larger discussion concerning the Supreme Court and the courts. Obviously, you can pass all the legislation that you want, but what we've learned over the years is that depending on who's on the court, that legislation can be struck down. And we have, at this point, I think the most conservative court that we've had in 70 to 80 and maybe 100 years. So I thought maybe a larger discussion there. I thought that the focus on the economy, putting that front and center, made all the sense in the world. To my mind, I didn't see any moments where I thought, oh my gosh, I can't believe he mentioned that, or really any huge missing pieces. We knew he was going to talk about Ukraine. We knew he was going to touch on China, on climate change, on criminal justice. I think in a lot of ways this was more of a typical State of the Union, a laundry list of things we've done and things that we want to do.
Jessica, it's good to see you on camera. We had you off camera there for a while, so it's good. On the left-hand part of your screen there is, of course, what is happening live in Washington, D.C. following the second State of the Union address by President Biden. And we also have Zev Yaroslavsky from the UCLA School also to talk to us about tonight the State of the Union. Zev, I want to talk about going ahead. I would love to be able for you to put on your political prognosticating cap, if you will. The election is 666 days away. All 435 House seats, 34 Senate seats up for grabs. Only one announced presidential candidate in Donald Trump. We know Nikki Haley is poised to run. We have heard names like Ron DeSantis, Gavin Newsom. If you had to pick a GOP nominee and the Democratic nominee, who would that be?
Well, I've learned a long time ago not to prognosticate too much. The way the Republican primaries are set up, it's mostly winner, if not all, winner take all. And so Donald Trump is still popular with enough of and maybe with the majority of the Republican primary voter, but certainly with the plurality of them. And if he can win with the plurality in the majority of the states, he'll get the majority of the delegates and he'll be the nominee. If he doesn't win, then the speculation is, will he try to blow up the election for the Republican who did beat him. I mean, he's capable of doing anything. I don't know who, if I were betting, and I don't bet, I'd say it'll be Biden versus Trump again, but I wouldn't bet a lot on it, and I certainly wouldn't bet my firstborn, and she'll be very happy to hear that. I think that the Republican Party wants generational change. The Republican voters do, just like a lot of the Democratic Party is seeking generational change. But it appears that it's moving and it's trending towards a rematch between Biden and Trump. And frankly, I think that may not be the most exciting election, but I think it may be the most consequential. And we'll see what happens.
I guess I should have learned my lesson.
I can't predict what will happen on the Republican side.
I should have learned my lesson not to ask a politician to give a straight answer, Zev. So.
Well, as we await the...
I had 40 years of training.
I know.
There you go.
Shame on me.
Well, as we await the Republican response from Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders, as Zev was just referring to, about generation of leadership, she is expected to talk about how it's time for a new generation of leadership in America, as President Biden is greeting some last visitors as he exits the chambers tonight. And I want to talk to you, Jessica, about the president's tone, talking about Republicans, referring to them as my friends. He still has 2 years left to try and get things passed, obviously, with the House that's dominated by Republicans now. There was lots of talk about working together. Do you think the needle was moved at all tonight, Jessica?
I really don't know. I mean, we know that this is not just a polarized country in terms of voters, but we know that our elected officials are extremely polarized. And the reason I'm pausing for a minute is, on the one hand, that's exactly what the president should do. In a divided government, if you want to get anything done, you have to say unity, bipartisanship, we're going to work together. There's simply no question about it. And I think that's the president's personality. He was in the Senate for a long time, and he had to work with Republican colleagues, and I think enjoyed doing that at times. So I think that's genuine when he says it, but this is a different Republican Party than the one that he worked with, for instance, in the Senate, or even when he was the vice president. I think it's a different Republican Party. Let's look at the fact that it took 15 votes for Kevin McCarthy to become the speaker here. I think there's a real question as to whether or not the Republican Party in the House will even stay together, how Kevin McCarthy will be able to govern them and keep that caucus together to make decisions. And then if they can stick together, where are the places where there will be compromise? And I think that a big job for the president moving forward, and for the members of the Senate, the Democratic members of the Senate, will be trying to find those pressure points where they can find compromise, but Republicans don't feel like they're hurting their chances in 2024. And Democrats don't feel the same way. Democrats want to be able to run on accomplishing something. And I think right now what we're hearing from Republicans is not necessarily a plan of what to do, but a plan of what not to do.
So, Jessica, I want to stay with you on somewhat of a related question to that. And just to give our viewers the heads up, once the president leaves, there'll be about a 5-minute wait, and then we'll get the State of the Union GOP response by Arizona Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders. But in that meantime, let's talk with you again, Jessica, about the mood of the room. It got a little chippy there, but it was interesting because Susie and I were talking about how the mood was kind of gentle pushback, if you will. There were 2 points in time. One was when the president was mentioning reducing the deficit by more than $1.7 trillion. At that point in time, I saw Speaker McCarthy over the left shoulder of the president kind of roll his eyes a little bit, mouthing the words "not true." And there was a little bit of people that were talking there in the hallway about that. But what was more interesting was when the president made mention of Social Security cuts, specifically to the Republicans, there was a lot of pushback. It was pretty chippy. Speaker McCarthy shook his head. A number of people started to kind of maybe talk a little bit, discuss a little bit, maybe object to it.
Out loud, yeah.
Yeah, and it got to the point where it became that the president himself reacted to it, said, oh, so it's off the books, almost acknowledging that that is no longer the case. I wanted to get, Jessica, your feel on that moment and what you thought about that. I don't think I've seen that in quite some time.
We haven't, and I heard you talking before we came on air. It obviously is a very different tone than the tone we had with former President Trump. I think you mentioned the fact that then Speaker Pelosi actually got up and tore up his speech. I mean, that was a very, I think, tense and different tone. And I think you're exactly right to have characterized this in a lot of ways as a gentle pushback. But yes, if there is a place where I think you're going to, and I think you used the word chippy, if it is going to get a little chippy, then it might be with respect to Social Security and Medicare. And we had heard even before the speech that that was really going to be a red line for the president, where he was going to say there are places where we can work together, and let's find those pressure points, let's find those places to compromise, and then there are places where I draw a red line. And he talked about reproductive choice, for instance. He said, I would not ever sign a nationwide ban. And I think what we see is that Social Security and Medicare are those issues where people feel so deeply for obvious reasons, and where this president, I think, really has a very hard line in the sand. And you know, again, when it comes to pushback, it was comparatively gentle, but I think we know what's ahead. And of course, when it comes to the deficit and when it comes to the debt ceiling, that is our next big battle. Not the deficit, but the debt ceiling. And people have kind of incorrectly intertwined those two things. And that's going to be the big test of whether or not this can be a bipartisan government right now.
Well, Zev, you know, guests who show up at the State of the Union, those who are invited, are often seen as a glimpse into the administration's agenda for the next year. Thoughts on that tonight with the guests present inside the House chambers?
The guests in the House chambers, is that what you're asking about?
Yes.
I couldn't hear you.
Yes. I was just saying that guests who show up or who are invited at the State of the Union are often seen as a glimpse into the administration's agenda.
Yeah. Well, I think, I think one of the more moving moments of a State of the Union is the people who come, who are invited by the president, and who is singled out by the president, who are singled out by the president when they're there. Certainly, the gentleman who saved the lives in Monterey Park by grabbing the semi-automatic weapon from the assailant was a great moment. The parents of Tyree, who was murdered in Memphis, that was even the entire House stood up in applause for both of them, and I think that's a human moment. I do want to say something about the Social Security debate, which you were talking to Jessica about. Joe Biden didn't make that up out of whole cloth. There are some Republican members of Congress and senators who have actually proposed making cuts. That's what he was citing. And I think it's been an embarrassment to the overall Republican Party and the leadership of the House and the Senate that somebody has made those kinds of proposals. And I think that's what they were shouting down. It was an embarrassment. Social Security is not going to be cut. Medicare is not going to be cut. There isn't going to be a bill banning abortion nationally. Those things aren't going to pass the Congress. But they're red meat for both Democrats and Republicans, depending on the issue. And I thought he actually played it pretty well. So it's off the table. Okay, we have a deal. This is part of the politics of a State of the Union address, although it's gotten very chippy over the years, even more so in the last few years. Yeah.
Well, Zev Yaroslavsky and Jessica Levinson, thank you so much for joining us tonight to give us your input on the State of the Union address. We always appreciate your expertise.